The little girl had been sleeping beneath a broken awning for 3 nights when the most feared man in the city stopped his black car beside her. She was barefoot, soaked from the morning rain, and clutching a torn photograph of a woman who would never come back. Everyone else had walked past her. Some had stared. Some had looked away. But the man whose name made criminals tremble stepped out of his car, removed his expensive coat, and placed it over her tiny shoulders. 15 years later, that same homeless girl would stand between him and death, and reveal a truth that would change both their lives forever. Before we begin, if you believe kindness can give someone a second chance and that family is sometimes created by love rather than blood, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to life. It was a bright afternoon in the city of Belgrave, the kind of afternoon when sunlight spilled across glass buildings and made the streets look almost beautiful. But behind those shining towers existed another world, one filled with people who slept wherever they could find shelter. That was where 8-year-old Nari Voss had been living after losing the only family she knew. Her mother had died months earlier, and her father had disappeared years before. Nari had learned to survive by collecting discarded food, hiding from cruel strangers, and sleeping with one hand wrapped tightly around her mother's photograph. She didn't trust adults anymore. She had learned that promises were often just pretty lies. Then came Kashan Rook. Kashan was 38, a single father, and the secret head of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the city. People knew him as a ruthless man who never forgave betrayal. His business empire stretched through nightclubs, warehouses, restaurants, and shipping companies, while his darker operations remained hidden behind layers of loyal men. Yet beneath the reputation was a father who had lost his wife years earlier and had spent every night worrying about the kind of world his young son, Tavian, would inherit. That afternoon, Kashan was returning from a business meeting when he saw Nari sitting beneath the awning. His driver wanted to keep going, but Kashan noticed the photograph in her hand. Something about the girl's exhausted eyes reminded him of his own son after his mother's funeral. He stepped out, crouched in front of her, and asked why she was alone. Nari said almost nothing. She simply stared at the expensive shoes in front of her and prepared herself to be disappointed again. Kashan didn't ask for her story twice. He took off his coat, wrapped it around her, and told his driver to bring the car around. He took Nari home that day, not as an employee, not as charity, but as a child who needed somewhere safe. His mansion was enormous, filled with marble floors, security guards, and rooms that seemed larger than the streets where Nari had slept. She was terrified of everything. She was afraid of the dining table, afraid of the silent servants, afraid that someone would eventually tell her she didn't belong. Tavian was the first person who made her feel differently. He was 10 years old, quiet, thoughtful, and still carrying the sadness of losing his mother. At first, he didn't know what to do with Nari. Then one afternoon he found her sitting alone in the garden and quietly placed half of his sandwich beside her. Nari looked at him suspiciously. Tavian simply walked away. The next day, she sat beside him. By the end of the month, the two children were inseparable. Kashan watched their friendship from a distance. For the first time in years, laughter returned to his home. Nari began attending school. She learned mathematics, literature, music, and eventually developed a fascination with medicine. Whenever Kashan asked why she wanted to become a doctor, she always gave the same answer: because nobody should have to watch someone they love die when there might have been a way to save them. Years passed, and the frightened little girl disappeared beneath the confident young woman she became. Nari grew into someone intelligent, disciplined, and compassionate. She never forgot the broken awning where her life had changed. She also never forgot the man who had stopped his car. But Kashan's world was never truly safe. As Nari approached 23, Kashan's criminal empire began facing a dangerous enemy. A former lieutenant named Orlan Creed had become obsessed with taking control of everything Kashan had built. Orlan knew Cashin's weaknesses, his businesses, his security systems, and most importantly, the people he loved. Cashin increased security around Nari and Tavian without telling them why. He wanted to protect his children from a war they had never chosen. One bright afternoon, Nari returned home from the hospital where she was completing her medical training. The mansion looked strangely quiet. She noticed an unfamiliar vehicle near the side entrance and immediately felt something was wrong. Inside, she discovered Tavian unconscious after being attacked, while Cashin was lying on the floor of his study, bleeding heavily from a gunshot wound. For a moment, Nari froze. Then the girl who had once been too frightened to ask anyone for help took control. She rushed to Cashin, checked his breathing, found the bullet wound, and immediately began treating him with the knowledge she had spent 15 years acquiring. The attackers had assumed Cashin would die before anyone found him. They had forgotten the homeless child he had once rescued had grown into a skilled medical professional. Nari worked through the afternoon without stopping. She controlled the bleeding, stabilized Cashin, and discovered that the bullet had narrowly missed a major artery. Every second mattered. Outside, Cashin's men searched for the attackers, but inside that room, Nari fought for the life of the man who had once fought for hers. Finally, as evening sunlight poured through the windows, Cashin opened his eyes. The feared Mafia boss looked at the woman beside him and realized something that shook him more deeply than any enemy ever could. 15 years ago, he had believed he was saving a helpless little girl. But now that little girl had become the person who saved him. Nari sat beside his bed, exhausted, tears running silently down her face. She held the same old photograph of her mother in one hand and Cashin's hand in the other. She had never forgotten where she came from, and she had never forgotten what he had done for her. Cashin looked at her and understood that family had never been about blood. It had been about who stayed when the world walked away. The attack eventually brought down Orlan's organization, and Cashin began dismantling the darkest parts of his own empire. He wanted his children to inherit something better than fear. He invested in shelters, medical clinics, and programs for homeless children, quietly giving other children the same second chance Nari had received. Years later, Nari became a respected doctor, while Tavian built a legitimate business that carried their family name into a completely different future. Cashin grew older, softer, and finally learned that strength wasn't measured by how many people feared you, but by how many people felt safe because you were there. And every year, on the anniversary of the day he found Nari beneath that broken awning, the family returned to the same street. They never forgot the little girl who had once believed nobody cared. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Sometimes one small act of kindness can completely change a person's future. Special request, comment, kindness can change a life, if you believe that no child should ever be forgotten, no matter where they come from. Because sometimes, the person you rescue today becomes the person who saves you tomorrow. And sometimes, the greatest family stories begin not with blood, but with one stranger deciding to stop, look down, and say, "You don't have to be alone anymore."